Welcome to the Anti-Corruption Crusader podcast. I'm your host, Pana Ratana Banangkun. This podcast is our sixth episode highlighting and recognizing professionals from around the world with passion and expertise in integrity, ethics, and anti-corruption. My hope is that these series of podcasts will inspire people from around the world to make the same personal journey, and their successes will help inspire others to uplift good governance, ethics, and fight corruption wherever you are. Our guest today is Khairil Yusof. Khairil used to work as a program consultant for the UNDP and UNSCAP, and is information technology consultant at the International Labor Organization. He specializes in using information technology and open data to fight corruption. Currently, he's the co-founder of the CNAR project, an initiative to organize, advocate, and develop tools for better transparency and governance for Malaysian citizens and else in the region as well, I guess. Khairil, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me on this
So,
podcast.
so
Yep.
we've crossed paths a couple of times in many of the workshops in the region, but can you share a little bit about how you got started and your, I guess, your journey into anti-corruption, as well as what you're
Yeah,
doing now at the CNR project, please?
yeah, it's one of those, I think everybody shares this story that you'd never really plan for this. Um, yeah, so or originally CNR project, I think it's kind of started around 2008 in Malaysia. So Malaysia has always been like a one party. It's a democracy, but it's always been ruled by one party since independence. In 2008, the two biggest states, Selangor and Penang, economically. So Selangor is like the state that is where Kuala Lumpur is in as well, and as well all our major airports. So Malaysia has state elections and state governments, and as well as the federal government. So in 2008, for the first time, these two states fell to the opposition, right? So the two most powerful economic states in Malaysia became opposition, and it was the first time that was a transition democratically in Malaysia, peaceful democratic transition to another government, right? So for the first time, Malaysians understood like, wow, this is possible. That you can switch governments peacefully through a vote, and that all the supposed threats, instability, riots, people didn't actually happen. Everybody woke up the next day, you had a new government, and well, business continues as usual. You go to work and the trains are running. There are no riots on the street. The news might be a shock on the newspaper, but in terms of the daily life of everybody else, it didn't make a difference. And for me at the time, as one of the voters in that state, it was more like a protest vote. We kept hearing a lot about corruption, but again, I was not invested. I was just a person, normal citizen in that sense, doing about my daily life. And yeah, at that time, we learned that, well, our vote does matter. And it seemed it wasn't planned. People like me didn't attend political rallies. We were not activists in any sense of the word. We simply voted, right, as normal citizens, and we found out that wait, everybody else did the same thing as as us. Um, and yeah, that allowed made us question, including people like myself, like who did we actually vote for? I didn't know who I voted for. I just voted for not the current government, right? Um, and that was worrying to me. So that's kind of how CNR project started. We were like, okay, we had this power to change governments peacefully for different reasons, but we need to know more about who are we electing. So at that time in 2008, people really didn't know, including myself, who our politicians were, who we were electing, whose interests they were. And at that time, Facebook was not that big yet. So again, you didn't really, if you Google or search, you couldn't find any information on any of the elected representatives, who they were, what their CV was, what their previous job, just absolutely nothing. So CNR started from that, and we're like, okay, we should start building better databases or information. So we worked with other civil society on, at first, just initial basic information on our elected representatives or our federal parliamentarians. And it was at that stage that we found out that really we had very little information, not even a basic CV. And that was kind of shocking to people like me, that we have people running the country and we don't even know what they graduated in, what field or what profession or what experience they have, right? So that was a shock. Um, but then around 2013, this is a prelude, I think, to your next questions around 1MDB. Corruption started getting worse. And 2013 would be a general election, meaning the election of the federal uh, for the national government of Malaysia. And then that's when things started getting serious. There were allegations of corruption. We were starting to look to find out more about we were finding out more about what is it, about budgets and expenditures and questions of billions of dollars missing and going on. And at the same time as well, the government was cracking down. So I think around 2011 was the first birth safe protests in Malaysia. So this is like one of the first big modern protests in Malaysia, where it's just ordinary citizens protesting on the street, and the government cracked down hard. So that was the first protest I ever attended in 2011. I had to Google how to protest, right? The government basically was telling us you're not allowed to go into the city. It's a curfew. You're not allowed to wear a yellow shirt. I know it means a different thing in Thailand, but you were in Malaysia. Yellow was for pro-democracy protests or fair elections for birthday. And when we went in there, we were shocked. We faced the full force of what we could call government violence, right? We were tear gassed. We had police barricades. And for somebody like me who has never even gotten a speeding ticket, that was scary in terms of the power that government has and the violence that can be unleashed onto normal citizens in to protect that power that they have, even it's for anti-corruption. And I think that was the key point where I changed from a normal tech person doing data and websites to more of an activist, right? I was like, wow, this is too much power for government to have. And I started to be more aware of, civil rights and the fact that, well, I need to do something more rather than just be a part-time person and be more activated on it. So yeah. And then I think the key moment there is like, one, I need to do something better. And then second, people in power have to be held accountable. It wasn't so much for corruption at that stage. It was the fact that if you have that much power, you have to be accountable. You can't just order the police to, tear gas peaceful protesters on the street. You should not have the power to randomly arrest people to make them as examples, right? So yes, I guess that was I think the journey from CNR project, and then from 2013 onwards, yes, we didn't win the federal elections, and 1MDB, I think the follow elections started to happen, but we now had a clear focus. This is possible. The government doesn't want to do this, but we already have experience before that. Yes, there is a possibility in Malaysia for a peaceful transition through democracy. So this is the way forward, and yeah, and CNR's the seed of CNR, like as an organization, started around the 2013 general elections. Yep.
That's quite fascinating, and I think it's a very novel idea on how just a basic information about your politician and candidate, sorry, can make a difference. Can you give an example on maybe a particular politician or person that once you put up the CV, was there anything that was startling or interesting that changes the election?
Um, I wouldn't say it's startling. I think the startling fact was the fact that we didn't have CVs. Um, um, Not for any specific politician, but for most of them. Um, Others that we found out was they had fake degrees and they were okay with putting fake online degrees as their resume, even as ministers. Um, so yeah, and then for me on the anti-corruption side, I don't think it changed. But when I started tracking how many politicians were involved in corruption, it became a huge number. So this is before 1MDB, and it was like $10 billion worth of funds. This is US dollars worth of funds that have been misappropriated, missing over, uh, about 2 decades, of which most of the politicians were involved, but never held accountable. So that's when I realized that it doesn't seem to. That was the first project I did, was to track how many people were associated with these cases, and I realized that they were still, how to say, elected with impunity, as in it didn't matter that they were even in the news for all these scandals, they were still re-elected, and yeah. So I think that was the kind of the started feeling that, wait, this is not just a civil rights issue. I think these people are also involved in systematic corruption, right? And probably should be, yeah, probably should be tracked, and we sh need to hold them accountable in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's happening in Thailand. Also, we are going through a local administrative election, and many of the candidates was allegedly involved in illegal gambling and all sort of shady stuff. But despite that, they are alleged to spend heavily on vote buying and therefore gets elected. But the interesting thing is that it takes two hands to clap, right? So if the CV or the background is shady and people don't elect them, that's the best outcome. But unfortunately, there's something that we need to understand more of, despite all these bad behaviors, bad credential, why they still get elected. So my next question is, what about your specialties in information technology and digital security? Do you think that the landscape has changed in the past decades, and what do you foresee as maybe the new tools that we can use to fight corruption?
Yeah, so when we first started, around 2013, as I mentioned, or even as early as 2008, in kind of organizing data at that stage, one of the changes is the fact of, especially for anti-corruption, is the clear definitions on kind of the data or what information that we need to capture to track and uncover corruption. So back in 2008, I think we we knew that we had to organize the information, but there was not clear any kind of clear standards on how to do it. It was in a similar way of how do we store information about our elected representatives, right? Which committees were they on, which directorships they held, and so on. So we knew at that time it was important, but we didn't really know how. So at CNR, we were tech folks. We knew how to build databases, but we were not anti-corruption folks, right? So we built a few different systems, and we failed a few times. Um, because again, building IT systems versus actual knowledge on what their systems are supposed to do are two very different things, but they both need to be done at the same time. Um, but we did after those first failures, we learned it's like, no, we need to know more about anti-corruption standards. How do you, what are the key information that you need to be stored and so on. So our first go at that, when we reached out to the wider world, we looked at, at other examples from other countries, and we learned that a few other countries, including the UK, already had basic data standards on how to store elected representatives, the committees and the organizations that they were involved in, like which political parties and committees. And once we got that, we realized that, wow, by adopting the expertise of others in terms of defining these standards, we realized that the tools became way more powerful. and it can be used for a lot of different ways that we didn't think of in Malaysia. Um, in a similar way, we contributed our own Malaysian perspective on it, which is kind of funny in the current situation. And so at that time, when we as Malaysians saw elected representatives and we saw the standard as being able to store memberships and positions in committees, we thought, wait, can we use, instead of just political parties, can we put companies in there as well and directorships as well? So we extended the database to include everything about politicians in what positions they held in all the different committees and organizations. Um, and that gave us the first hint into the ability to capture data to show networks of politicians and influence who are their fellow members, which committees that they were on, and which companies they were involved in as well. But at a very position, and later on, what we learned was other people were also developing similar standards around procurement, like open contracting. And then more recently, now we heard about beneficial ownership standards as well. And each one of these data standards allowed us to build better systems or collect better data. And I think that's one of the most powerful changes recently in the fact that the data standards that we need for IT as IT people to build the tools are also being defined and created by anti-corruption experts. And that allows us to, yeah, find all sorts of different novel ways of using this data that has the input of the corruption and allows us to do really interesting things because the data and systems that we built on are based on, expert feedback.
Right.
So I think
Let
that's a main change. Yep.
me ask you this, Khairil.
Mhm.
If we're talking about collecting data, whether it's
Mhm.
for procurement or on a politician, what are some of the most useful or impactful data to collect that could maybe, help fight corruption? If you have to choose maybe four or five data
Yeah.
fields or type of data, what would it be?
For me, it would definitely be the number one thing would be politically exposed persons or or the individuals involved, right? So one of the things I've seen in data is that there's a lot of data. People talk about procurement and contracts and interest and assets, and also about corruption cases. But you also, I love TI's one of TI's original campaigns a few years back is end impunity, right? But somehow I've learned in Malaysia that we never know about who these people are. We never track who are these people, right? We always these corrupt people, right? Or these politicians. So we never hold them accountable. We never define their names. Um, and so we knew that this was important to capture people, information on people. But there's a danger there in the sense that which people do you capture? And one of the most important definitions I've learned from the anti-corruption side is that there is a specific definition for people who are at high risk of corruption, which is politically exposed persons. So I think this is the number one piece of data that you need first. Because if you need to find out corruption in procurement, you need to know who are. Once you find out what the corruption is in procurement, you need to know who was the person who did the corruption, right? So what happens, I found is that in order for that to end, you got to find out who did it or why such and such corruption happened. So for me, yes, the key one will be politically exposed persons. Now that there's a clear definition of it, it allows us to store data. And one thing I like to stress on this standard is that it's quite extensive. It includes definitions for close associates. It includes definitions for subordinates and business partners as well. Um, and because of this definition, and because it's also in anti-money laundering laws, it provides a safe space for civil society to store this data without me getting into trouble. um,
Just for the
yeah.
audience purposes,
Mhm.
what do you mean by politically exposed person? Can
Yeah.
you give us some details
Yeah.
on that?
So, so I this is a term new to me as well when I first heard about it. As I mentioned before, I was struggling. People had called up, why is my name on this list, right? Or is my list on the database? So as a layperson, I was like, well, this person is suspicious, but what is suspicious, right? What's the definition for that? And thanks to some of these workshops organized by UNODC, I learned that, well, there is a organization called the Financial Action Task Force, based in Geneva, which is an intergovernmental organization that works to define a lot of different standards on how to prevent anti-money laundering and corruption. And one of their guidance, which I think is guidance 22, you can download it for free on the internet, is for all governments to define a set of people or individuals that would be at high risk of corruption. They're not necessarily corrupt, but if we go back to the core definition of corruption, it's abuse of power for personal gain, which means there has to be a person. And it has to be a person who has some sort of power or control. So FATF then defines these classes of people that are what they consider high risk, meaning that if you're opening a bank account, if a bank has to process a financial transaction, if a person is on such a list, then they should have better scrutiny on that transaction because that person is in a position of power who can who can possibly do a corrupt transaction, not necessarily is corrupt, but high risk, right? So you need to look at that transaction. When I transfer money overseas, I'm not a person at high risk. I have no power. So the money that I've gotten is probably not through some abuse or corruption. Um, so yeah, so FATF defined this thing. They define it as politically exposed persons. And it's a list of several classes of people, usually heads of state, ministerial ministers, high-level politicians, meaning heads of parties and the executive of parties. It also includes foreign heads of government. So, for example, if a Malaysian minister tried to open a bank account in Thailand, that person would also be considered a politically exposed person in Thailand because he's a foreigner who has power. It also includes senior civil servants as well. So this would be the top, like your state secretaries and whatnot. It also defines, depending on which country, other roles, right? So I'm not sure if this is sensitive, but it can include, in Malaysia, for example, the military is included as a politically exposed person. But we do not have royalty in our definition. But and then further to that, which is of more interest to anti-corruption activists, is that the politically exposed person also includes associates of these people holding power, which means their business partners, their immediate family members,
Mhm.
and also their subordinates. So
I
yeah, so
see.
this is a definition defined by FATF and adopted by almost every country and financial institution in the world.
Right.
So yeah.
So I can see how all this would be useful for citizens to not only citizens, but the private sector like banks and corporations. They have information on political candidates, background, the shady stuff they might have been involved in or convicted in. And then you have this exposure risk. You can do a lot. But let's say we go back in time and take what the one MDB case, for example. If you had all these tools in place, could have it been prevented?
I I don't think it could be prevented in Malaysia. Um, and this is the part where I often say, yes, I am a person with a technical background, but there's never a silver bullet for anti-corruption. So no matter tools, data, whatever it is, it's just one tool, but it's not a silver bullet that is going to kill corruption, right? So I don't think it would have been one of the tools, but I don't think it would have been a silver bullet. Uh, because in when you mentioned about alleged, corruption earlier in our discussion, in Malaysia, it's not alleged. there, it's literally in the courts. It's literally in our Auditor General reports. It's in official government documents. It's in official parliamentary transcript. It's not alleged. So the corruption has been happening with impunity in the open, right?
Right, right,
It's not even an allegation. It's a government report with detailed numbers and so on, right? Using money exchange to launder money to buy property in London. Those are all reported facts, not denied by the politicians themselves.
right,
Um,
right.
so yeah, so on one hand, yes, I think what would have helped at that time for data, I think would have given a better picture on a more complete picture on what kind of systemic issues were in place, which is still happening now.
Right.
So the things that we learned about 1MDB in Malaysia. So 1MDB, for those who are not familiar with anti-corruption, Malaysia's prime minister was found with 680 million US dollars in his personal bank account, and flagged by some whistleblowers, as well as later the US Department of Justice, right? Um, and yeah, it unleashed a series of questions and investigations in Malaysia onto how could that possibly happen? How could one transfer $680 million into your personal account? That's a large amount of money. Um, so yeah, so the tools at the time probably wouldn't have prevented it, but we probably would have a better picture
Hmm.
um, to better understand what the system is still in place now.
Hmm.
So this is one thing that I would like to highlight is that the systematic risk in Malaysia of another 1MDB is still here.
Hmm.
It's still here in Malaysia and it still exists. Malaysians have learned nothing from 1MDB, unfortunately. So when I say by better systems, I mean that in order to move, this is the things that I've learned was that in order to move 680 million dollars, and later on we found out it was actually around 3.5 billion, an additional 3.5 billion dollars or so, is that there's a whole lot of actors, companies, bank institutions, senior government officials, and so on, who all had to have knowledge of such a thing happening. Um, and so for us, one was that at that time when I did the 1MDB network maps, we didn't have a definition of PEPs, so we didn't have data on associates. So one of the things that we missed at that time was that there was a lot of people involved in it that were not officially on record as a director. So they were controlling, or they were associates, or they were facilitating the corruption, but they didn't exist in any data. So that was one point.
Right.
The second point that I think, thanks to the beneficial open data standard now, is a better, clear definition of these close associates, which have power of control over government or assets. And I think that's the two things that we're missing. So now, for such things like this, we now have a better picture of who are involved. So it might possibly prevent another 1MDB, but it's not related to this question. The systematic flaws that allow 1MDB are still in Malaysia right now. So technically, another person could do it. Yeah.
Wow. That's quite unfortunate, but I think it's not unique to Malaysia as well. But
Mm.
hopefully that the idea of bringing information that people are not aware of to be, on the surface or accessible is going to help in one way or the other. So we're almost out of time. Just quickly, you think AI has a role in this, or how could it help?
I think AI is just the next evolution. So the first part I mentioned, we had PDFs and documents. Then the next part of the evolution was to have more structured data, better data on, tracking politically exposed persons, beneficial ownership. The next level on this would be smarter tools in using the data collected. So for example, instead of me manually writing a program to uncover a network, you could now train AI on the data to say, can you give me known associates of this person, right? So it makes it a little bit more accessible for general people to access the data that before required data analysts, to do all the analysis for anti-corruption. So I think there's possibilities on this, but my caveat or thing is that again, AI is not a silver bullet. In order for AI to work, you need good data. In order for need to good data, you need to have access to data. And in order to have access to data, you need laws that allow governments to publish and make this information. So yes, I see AI as the next evolution to it, but it just simply builds on top of the tools and experience that we have before. And one thing that I would say is that AI is not the silver bullet. It will still require all the previous efforts, and all the existing efforts that are not AI still need to be pursued in order for AI to have the data and information for it to be useful. Yeah.
That's a very nice way to put it, Khairil. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I appreciate all the insights, and hopefully we can have you back again to talk more about the Sonar project. Um, Thank you, Khairil, our anti-corruption crusader.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Thanks.